Here are your hosts, Kyle, Fellows, and Andrew Mertig. This is the Draft Fellows Podcast. Welcome back to episode 5 of the Draft Fellows Podcast. Make sure that you are following the Draft Fellows channel on YouTube, or you can check out the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Today, we are covering the AFC North draft review. If you want to check out the first 4 episodes of the series to hear about the AFC and NFC East, follow the channel or audio podcast. Kyle, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I've had a decent day and been looking forward to this. Getting to talk some Ravens and Browns on the show today, so it's going to be a good time. We got some news today, Andrew. Justin Jefferson. I don't know if you've heard of him. He plays wide receiver. Broke the bank today. Got $140 million contract from the Minnesota Vikings. There was, all the buzz, like, is he going to get out of Minnesota? Like, are they going to do something different? Of course he stays. When you have a player like that, you don't let him out the door. So they paid him $140 million. 110 of that is guaranteed, and 35 per on average over those 4 years. So a healthy deal for Mr. Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world, right? It sort of seemed like they were going to have to make a decision between Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson. The Vikings chose to go the rookie quarterback route. That's going to give them the flexibility contract-wise to be able to pay a receiver $35 million a year. And then, see how it works out. I think if you're the Vikings, you're just really relying on the fact that J.J. McCarthy is going to be at least average. And if he's above that, then suddenly you're really cooking with something with all the offensive skill positions they have. But, don't forget, the Vikings have 2 pretty darn good offensive tackles who are going to be looking to get paid at some point in the future. You're paying Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, a few years away. But, some big money deals there. Fortunately for their defense, not a lot of big contracts there, so some flexibility. But, yeah, exciting for Justin Jefferson. I'm guessing for a team like the Dallas Cowboys, it's a little scary to see the Vikings be the first to reset the market.
Yeah.
And then suddenly CeeDee Lamb's contract's going to have to get done in the near future.
Yeah, there's a lot of those contracts lingering out there. We know, like, T. Higgins is looking for another deal soon, one way or another. So lots of ripple effects. I think this is a roster building show, right? Like, we just love the numbers are fascinating. The way that teams make these decisions, super interesting. And so there's lots of ways to build a roster. And so, I mean, not to be homers because we are Packers fans, but the Packers have assembled an incredibly cost-effective wide receiver room, and there's a lot in the national media who are pretty excited about the upside of that room for this year. The flip side is the Minnesota Vikings, who've spent draft capital. I mean, even last year with Addison adding, they didn't shy away from adding another wide receiver, even though they already had like someone like Jetta's in the building. And then, of course, they had the opportunity to make him the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, and they didn't shy away from that because they knew what they had. So there's no right way, there's no wrong way, but it just goes to show you can build a roster that can be competitive in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that think very differently about paying elite wide receivers. And, is that beneficial long term? I think just because something maybe hasn't worked in the past doesn't mean it won't going forward. And so, I try to stay away from those things because I think lumping every situation in the same bucket like they're identical is not exactly a great way to do business. Justin Jefferson, probably the best wide receiver in the NFL, if not maybe second. And so him getting paid, not a huge surprise, but we haven't seen a lot of really, really top end wide receivers who are making that much money have a lot of team success attached to them, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it is an interesting factor nonetheless.
Not to toot your own horn, Andrew, but I know you're really high on Justin Jefferson, so this is like a small party for you as well. Where was he your wide receiver 2 in that class?
He was my overall player 11 in that class.
Yeah, so really high.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people. I mean, there were questions: is he a slot only?
Yeah.
There were just a ton of things up in the air there. And I think because Jamar Chase was sort of the lead receiver,
Yep.
even when
Right.
Jefferson was in his last year there, and Chase had another year at LSU after that. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of people were saying, well, like, is Justin Jefferson really the guy? And then,
Mm-hmm.
that's one of those examples where believing in a prospect turned out good for me. We don't have about the bad situations.
No, no, this is a positive show only for sure. But it sounds so crazy looking in hindsight to say like that Justin Jefferson may have been a limited prospect, that he could only win in the slot. Like just so many things we learn as you
Yeah.
get into the process and as a player finds the league. But
He was in the same draft class as Jerry Judy, Jalen Waddle. Is that
I
correct?
believe so. Wow, we're
Yeah.
off the yeah. So it's just made, I mean, we thought in the 20s like he was going to be a value, and we weren't wrong, right? Like what a player he's become, and congrats to him. And of course, he'll enjoy that $140 million that he's now earned. But are we ready to jump into the AFC North today?
Absolutely. So we're gonna go with the Baltimore Ravens first, and the Ravens this year, as they always do, had quite a few picks. And at the end of the first round, they take cornerback Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. They come back in the second with Roger Rosengarten, the offensive tackle from Washington, Adisa Isaac, the edge from Penn State, in the third. Two fourth-round picks. Tez Walker, the wide receiver from North Carolina, and TJ Tampa, the cornerback from Iowa State. In the fifth round, they get running back Rasheen Ali out of Marshall. They get a quarterback in the sixth, Devin Leary from Kentucky. And then they close things out with two seventh round picks, Nick Samek and Sanusi Kane.
What do you think, man? Like this is the Ravens are a team that always seems to get incredible value, and I'm always upset. Like as a non-Ravens fan, no offense to Ravens fans out there, that great players just always seem to fall into their laps. They don't have to trade up; they just end up with these great players every single year. This is not probably my favorite Ravens draft in recent memory, but there are a lot of good players in this class at the same time. So let's kind of walk through this one. Nate Wiggins at the top. Like this is a fascinating player, right? He was my cornerback 6. Where did you have Nate Wiggins, Andrew?
Yeah, and before I get into Nate Wiggins, I just do need to clarify the 2020 draft
Okay.
was, in fact, CD Lamb, Henry Ruggs, and Jalen Rager was picked right before
Ooh, yeah,
Justin
well, of course,
Jefferson.
Rager, yeah. Henry Ruggs,
So did I
interesting.
miss
We forget, man.
anybody? Ruggs, Judy,
Judy, yeah,
Lamb. Jefferson was kind of that consensus fourth player. I really, really liked him a lot in that class as well. So sorry,
yeah.
Jalen Waddle.
No,
I
it's
had to
good.
transpose. He was in the next class.
Yeah.
I had Nate Wiggins as my cornerback for 24th overall. So I do think that this is a good value. It's interesting because, the Ravens have had a lot of success in taking corners early and getting really, really good production out of them for a long time. And so you see Marlon Humphrey sort of getting to the end of his career trajectory here. And you would assume Nate Wiggins is going to kind of step in and be that starter in Baltimore as well. But he's just so thin.
Mm.
Like there's not a lot of historical precedence for a corner his size, not meaning height, but like meaning weight, and really holding up in the NFL. And it's especially concerning given the division they're in, right? Because
Mhm.
we know Cleveland's going to want to run the ball. We know Pittsburgh's going to want to run the ball. We know Cincy probably going to want to run the ball, but they're going to try to get the ball
Yeah.
to their receivers who are big and physical.
Yep.
And so for Nate Wiggins, this is going to be a really interesting challenge in this Baltimore defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned it. It's the weight, it's not the height because he's 6'1". So it's like you stretch out that 173 pounds and you get a little bit more nervous. And physicality was one of his, I don't want to say like shortfalls, but like that was a concern, right? How physical of a player is he? And then he has the frame to go with that. So only 20 years old though. So he's got a ton of upside, and the playmaking and ball skills are absolutely legitimate. And so it's something that, of course, a team like Baltimore is going to take that swing on, because if it hits, he could be a dynamic player for that defense for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mentioned I have him as my 24th overall corner. So I'm not saying he's bad. I'm just really curious how he is going to hold up. Because if he's allowed to just be a coverage guy, he's going to be really, really good. But if you're going to ask him to come up and be physical, which we think traditional Baltimore defense, their corners are going to be physical.
Mm.
I have some serious questions there. So we'll see what his development looks like. I get a question because I didn't really do a lot of deep dive into Rosengarten, and I
Mm.
know he shot up draft boards as
Yeah.
we closed in on the draft. What did you think of him, and what do you think of this pick?
Fascinating player. I liked Rosengarten quite a bit, and like there were some people as he kind of ascended who were really upset about that because they just didn't think that he was that talented of a player. He's fascinating because there's a lot of projection I think required in like what he's going to do at the next level. Really, really solid pass protector, but he played exclusively on the right side because Penix was a left-handed quarterback, right? So kind of he's always been a left tackle in high school and then early on when he got to Washington, but they moved him over to that right side because they thought it benefited Penix. So it'll be fascinating to see like someone will he move back to that left side as he goes to the NFL? Like how are they going to work that out? Where is he going to be long term? But just a fascinating player, needs to add some strength to his lower half. I think that was the biggest concern. Like especially as someone who played on the right tackle side that like might actually look like he should play like more on that left side as more of like a finesse pass blocker. So a lot of projection, like what's he going to be like in the NFL, I think are the questions. Went to the same high school as the McCaffrey brothers,
Huh.
Dylan and the one who just got drafted to Washington
Luke.
this year, Luke. Yeah.
Luke.
So, some good coaching in his past as well and good teammates as well. Just fascinating.
Yeah, I had Adisa Isaac as my 88th overall player, and I think a lot of people thought I had him kind of low. So to see him go 93rd, I think sort of matched up with where I had identified Isaac
Mm,
as a prospect. And I really like. I'm kind of on the beginning of their draft, but I love what they did in the fourth round. Tez Walker, I had all the way up as the 33rd player on my board. So
mm,
to get him at 113, I thought was an absolute steal. And then TJ Tampa was my 68th overall player. So to get him at 130, I think that is a really great value. I'll be honest. I mean, even though I have Wiggins rated ahead of Tampa, I think the value there and just the play style is maybe
mm.
a little bit more of that traditional Baltimore corner. So I really, really like that fit a lot.
Right, right. Tampa, I mean, I had Wiggins at CB6. Tampa was my CB7. So to get the spread between those, and I'm not saying like in the standard, but to get those players that far apart, I think is
Yeah.
incredible value to get Tampa there. And he's a true 200 pounds, right? Like this isn't your frail 173 that we were just talking about, but has that length and has good ball skills and is a great tackler. So I really like the package that Tampa brought. Adisa Isaac is a player. He's fascinating because he's a well-rounded player. He's a physical player. He's probably not going to like run around you a lot. You're not going to run up the arc and get, dipping under you a ton, but he's going to run through you. He's got powerful hands. And I do think he's going to set the edge really well as a run defender. So maybe not like someone who's going to be super dynamic as a pass rusher, but someone that you can leave on the field all the time and is going to be serviceable as well. And he actually had a torn ACL in the spring game in 2021. So he kind of spent the last couple of years kind of working back from that. I think 2023 was his closest to like being at full speed again. So maybe still an ascending player as he's kind of gotten healthy. And this year, of course, he was an all Big Ten player. So maybe some ceiling there for Adisa Isaac still to find.
Yeah, and I really like the fit of Devontae Walker being opposite of Zay Flowers as the guy who can kind of stretch the defense.
Yeah.
I do think maybe he is going to end up running a lot of like uh jogging routes. Yeah, I don't mean like at half speed. I mean like he's just out there getting reps. I don't know how
You don't think
often
he's going to
he
get a
is
lot of
going to get the
targets?
ball. I think
Yeah.
he's going to be the kind of player who is much more valuable to the team than he
Yeah.
is like fantasy football.
Correct.
Because
Yes.
I just think like he's going to stretch the field and allow Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers
Hmm.
to then operate in space. and he'll be a nice feature when they go play action to Derrick
Mhm.
Henry, and then you have Walker as that deep threat over the top.
Right, yeah, a player you have to account for, but is probably not gonna get fed the ball a whole heck of a lot in that offense with Andrews and Flowers and those guys working underneath, and as much as they like to run the ball as well, but, a good player to get that where they did in this draft for sure.
Yeah, I also think that Rasheen Ali out of Marshall is a really fun prospect, who may be allowed to be really productive in this Baltimore scheme.
Mm,
Although they have running backs coming out of their ears right now, so we'll see where he fits. But I think he's got at least got a chance to win, a backup role or a
yeah,
rotational role
yeah.
within this squad. So, anything else you want to say about the Ravens class?
No, I think that's about it. I didn't watch, the center and the safety that they took there in the 7th round, so, I couldn't tell you anything about Samick or Sanusi Kane, but, I'm sure they're great players.
Got to get some Nick Samick tape on
Yeah,
the
get some
board
s
here. So next up, we got the Cleveland Browns, and so the Browns had a really shallow draft class again, kind of recovering from the Deshaun Watson trade, if you will. I
mm,
think this is the last year that they're without their first round pick. So in the second, they end up getting defensive lineman Mike Hall Jr. out of Ohio State. In the third, they get Zach Zinter out of Michigan. They went Ohio State, Michigan back to back.
wow.
So Zach Zinter, the guard out of Michigan. Then they don't pick until the fifth round. They get Jamari Thrash, the wide receiver out of Louisville. In the sixth, they get linebacker Nathaniel Watson out of Mississippi State. And then two seventh round picks, Miles Harden, a cornerback out of South Dakota, and Jawan Briggs, a defensive lineman out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, it's tough when you don't have a ton of picks, right? So you kinda grade on a curve knowing, like, there's no first round pick here, and then, they don't pick again after the first 2 selections until the 5th round, and you just kinda sprinkle in some day 3 guys, so but I loved Mike Hall Jr., right? This was one of the most fascinating players in this draft class to be because of his profile is very, very interesting. He's a player that everyone thought was really, really light and like was going to be explosive, but just didn't have enough sand in the pants to probably hold up against the run. And you probably like we're gonna have to use him in some creative ways, right? He shows up at the combine 15 pounds heavier than he probably played all season long. And then he tested absolutely out of the gym. He's a 9.6 RAS player. So like this is a guy who put on the weight and then absolutely maintained that athleticism. And everybody thought, like, okay, like, of course he's going to be really explosive and really fast because of, he's 100 or at 280 pounds or whatever. But at 300 pounds, like, this is a player that I think you have to be really interested in his upside. He's raw. He needs to develop some counters and a better pass rush plan. But he's 20 years old, or at least he was on draft day. He's 20 years old on draft day. So this is a player that I think has an incredibly high ceiling. And in a league that's dominated by the three tech trying to get penetration up the middle, I really think that this is an exciting player that the Browns got in the 2nd round.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think he turns 21 like right at the beginning of the season.
Yeah,
So he's young, he's played at a really high level. Ohio State is not going to necessarily allow players to, be gap penetrators the same way like Byron Murphy was at Texas. They're
sure.
just not going to do that within their defense, but he's got all of the upside in order to do
Mm,
that. So I think he's a raw player, but instead of having to take him in the middle of the first round, if he had the kind of production profile that a Byron Murphy had, you can get him in the middle of the second. The Browns really needed some defensive line help. I think that is a wonderful fit for him. Gets to stay in the state of Ohio,
mhm.
so that's fun as well. You're a Michigan guy, so what do you think about Zach Zinter?
Yeah, so Zinter is interesting because he meant more to Michigan. He's a great football player, and I think he's going to start for the Browns probably for, a long time. I do think that he meant a lot to Michigan as a leader, as much as he did a football player. So I think the Browns did a nice job of getting someone else in there who's going to reinforce their culture, and really be that guy who can be an impact player in the running game, but also as a pass protector as well. But I don't know. Did you get to watch Zinter? Did you have uh, a day 2 grade on him? He was
I
kind of end of day 2 for me.
Yeah, I actually had a day 3 grade on him. I
Okay.
was really low, but I
Yeah.
understand that I probably didn't watch the best of his tape. I think it's just one of those players that as the process went on, I didn't get a chance to go back and watch a lot of the earlier stuff, and I think
Mhm.
that probably impacted my grade on him, but I definitely understand the upside there. And sometimes those interviews have a much, much bigger impact than we are aware of, right? Like,
Yeah.
because we're not going to see that stuff. We're not going to see the medicals. So it's clearly Zinter was somebody that they were comfortable with. And
Yeah.
the Browns have been really good offensive line development team quietly over the years. So definitely something that would give me a lot of optimism about
Yeah.
Zinter's future.
Fascinating that I don't think he was ever gonna be he was never gonna be a first round pick. He probably wasn't gonna be a second, I don't think he was gonna be a second round pick. So the fact that he got hurt at the end of the season and still went in the third round, I think is great for him, and I think speaks to what teams, found with him in the interview room, as you said. So someone who I think will be an impact player for a long time there, and good for Zach getting drafted in the third round after I'm sure being super frustrated with the way that, getting injured at the very end of the season when you're about to go pro. So any other thoughts on this Cleveland Browns draft class? It's pretty small. It's not a big group of guys here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Browns did pretty good with the capital that they had, which was obviously very limited. I think Thrash is a pretty solid value as a depth wide receiver, and then you take a couple of dart throws in the late portions of day 3, and you see what shakes out.
Yeah, absolutely. Should we wrap the show up?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. This has been a lot of fun talking Baltimore Ravens, talking Cleveland Browns. We're going to be back to talk about the rest of the AFC North next episode, episode 6. So come back and join us for that. Make sure you subscribe, find us, like us, and just participate with us as we go through this journey from the draft room to the gridiron. The Draft Fellows have you covered. So until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.